Cursing in adult cartoons has just become a regular thing, be they online ones or on streaming services. Nowadays, it's the immediate marker a show makes in order to tell its audience that it's not for kids. But cursing in shows isn't that simple. Strong language can be a powerful tool that can enhance what a story is trying to do, or just as easily detract from a show's goals and make things feel off or confusing. But I want to clarify my stance on this matter, since it has nothing to do with morality or something like that. It's a simple fact that while frequent profane language is common in adult shows, it just isn't necessary and sometimes weird. We even see that most people intuitively know that this is true with Hazbin Hotel, a show that's widely mocked for having an overabundance of strong language. It's clear from this and other shows that using them effectively in a show requires a level of respect for strong language, experience with how to use them, and an actual purpose when it comes to adding them into dialogue. So my stance for this is that if I think a cartoon or show should even have cursing, falls into two ways. If there's no point in adding curse words to what someone is saying, or if the character's statement is just as effective without strong language, then don't add it. Every time I've observed this in a show I've watched with cursing like this, it just universally comes across as unintentionally unnecessary, unnatural, immature, or plain annoying. The second way this falls is if a show's being made where all other aspects aside from the cursing works perfectly fine for all other audiences for the most part, then just cut the curse words and target it to everyone. Not only can more people appropriately watch that show, but strong language wouldn't feel random and out of place since, in all other aspects, it's a kid's show, or just a show for all ages. I'd say imagine if Gravity Falls had cursing for basically no reason. It'd feel weird because of how that show's constructed, and because nothing else in that show is mature to the point that it'd either be uninteresting to younger audiences or something they couldn't see. This might sound like a weird stance and you might be thinking, just let people put whatever they want into a show, but that's not my point. My point is that if they're used haphazardly, you'd fall into the similar pit that Hazbin did, to where it feels weird or unnatural as opposed to funny or scene enhancing. And like normal dialogue itself, strong language is a tool that can easily be misused. This is not a review, but I want to give examples from various different shows and break down how they use cursing either effectively or ineffectively. When it works. When cursing works in shows, it can do quite a few great things. Maybe it can work to ground us in the relatable or realistic tone the world established, or it can tell us about the characters that curse more than others, or potentially, it could be used to enhance jokes. I'll be getting into two opposite shows that handle cursing well in different ways, though the reasons why they both work are more similar than you think, starting with BoJack Horseman, as a popular example. This show does well as the cursing serves in most instances to make the show feel more realistic and to convey the seriousness of certain scenes better than if strong language wasn't used. The sparseness of these curse words and the intentionality that they have whenever they use this language also make sure the words still have punch when they're used, and they show that characters like BoJack and Diane actually think about what they're going to say, like when they have the argument where BoJack says that he's the victim of all of his screw-ups. This not only makes it clear that these characters are mature adults very subtly, and so they use the proper language like you'd expect them to, but it also allows for each curse word in scenes like this to feel warranted, since softer language in moments like this wouldn't have done them justice.
I think you want me to tell you that you can be better. And even though you are being a total asshole right now, I still believe it.
When Diane calls BoJack an asshole here, it's because that's the only appropriate word for how he's acting.
I'm the one who has to feel the guilt all day, every day.
So you're the victim here.
Yeah, and I know that's not the woke, progressive, intersectionally appropriate thing to say, but I would say, yeah, I'm the one who has suffered the most because of the actions of BoJack Horseman.
Jerk, or the C word, would have been either too soft or too much. And similar is true when BoJack says that he's the one who has to live with all this shit that he's done.
I'm the one who has to live with this shit. I'm the one who has to feel the guilt all day.
If he just said crap or stuff, given the severity of his actions and the seriousness of the conversation, that wouldn't have been enough. This is just one example in the show where the cursing's used as a tool to enhance scenes, while also making the show feel even more effectively mature since it has restraint and respect for these important words. And even on a smaller note, cursing varies with who's speaking. Mr. Peanut Butter never curses because he's so happy-go-lucky, while BoJack does because he's an immoral, alcoholic, washed-up old actor whose glory days are behind him. And for an opposite show, Take My Muffin handles cursing very effectively despite how raunchy it is. Outer reasons, similarly to BoJack Horseman, help the cursing feel effective, like with some characters cursing more or less depending on who they are. And you might think that since this show is so wild and uses curse words way more, the effectiveness of the strong language would be diminished through desensitization. But a few more things make it work, like the fact that it doesn't pull punches with its jokes, and it perfectly utilizes the fact that it's targeted towards adults, like with its long buildup of jokes throughout different episodes and its premise of being about business startuppers. As for one of my favorite jokes in the show, in episode 3, a character named Draka predicts that the main character, Rock, will completely fail at his business idea, and the entire episode builds up to his attempt at his business idea as being completely successful until he tells his investors what he did, and it completely blows up in his face suddenly. It took me like 2 rewatches to piece together the entirety of what made the joke what it was, which is something shows targeted towards all audiences could potentially do, but I don't think all audiences would actually piece that together on their own, since it's in depth and the punchline takes over 15 minutes to sink in with all the other jokes happening within the episode. And the second major thing is that the cursing's frequent, but never overused or weird, mostly thanks to the show's very sharp, witty dialogue and very unique insults. At the end of that same episode, Draka gets mad at Rock for being stupid and failing like how I explained earlier, and to insult his intelligence she could have simply said, "This shithead is a moron," in this context as opposed to what she said, which was,
"Of course he did! That dipstick wipes his ass before he shits!"
sort of stupid, but every episode is able to catch you off guard with the wildly good and funny insults characters throw at each other that never feel mean-spirited or wrong because they're usually fully deserved. On top of this, the premise of the show helps because it's about business startups who are always trying to become rich. And that's just not conceptually interesting for all ages for the most part. Take My Muffin leans into its adult nature with creative, sharp, and witty dialogue, while also having a lot of jokes that are pretty complicated, which overall creates an atmosphere where the show properly feels like it's targeted towards an adult audience, as opposed to a show that just tells raunchy jokes and is adult, quote unquote, in no other smart or clever way. And BoJack thinks of similar reasons due to its subject matter, premise, tone, and the character's utilization of language make it feel properly adult, natural, and mature when it does use strong language. It's thanks to the outer factors of these two shows that make the cursing within them work and feel natural in such a way that you'd probably miss whenever they use strong language because it simply just feels right. But there are also plenty of other shows that, to be adult, just add cursing in order to artificially say that that's the case as opposed to it being a natural part of the show or how the writers write dialogue. When it doesn't work. There are many cartoons where you could find where the cursing feels weird, and the first one I think of is Camp Camp. Cursing in this show is usually completely unnecessary for comedy or forced, and even when it feels more powerful, like when David cursed in episode 12 of season 1 after losing his temper, it still feels a bit weird because of the premise and how the show is written. The show's about a group of 3 kids and their time at a crappy summer camp that they all want to escape, and generally each episode mirrors normal kids shows down to childish stereotypes and language used, like in episode 1 where Billy throws Nikki off of a boat because no girls are allowed, to episode 4's lesson basically being think for yourself, in a very childishly told and obvious way, by the way.
Amen, sister.
Hey guys, check it out! I named him Timothy.
Nikki, that's incredible.
Huh?
Nikki, gross. It probably has worms. What is wrong with you?
But he brought gifts.
With dialogue, lessons, and conflicts like this, coupled with an art style like this, when something edgy or cursing does actually happen, it just feels out of place and weird instead of a creative juxtaposition like Happy Tree Friends, because it wholly establishes itself through its premise and how things happen within the episodes as a show for children.
Y'all are some ignorant fucking cunts. And the name's Neil. Let's get out of here, Nikki.
If a show's structurally like a kid's show, then the cursing is going to feel unnatural and out of place, and that's how Camp Camp is. Outside of that, we only occasionally get jokes only adult shows could make, like the episode with Adolf where the joke is that he looks and acts kind of like Hitler, or the Jews bit with the quartermaster.
Hey, so how'd you lose that hand anyway?
Yeah, Grandma and Grandma, the Jews, my Grandma.
I feel like you should be more specific.
But none of it is enough to actually make the show feel like it's for who it claims to target. I could see someone comparing this to South Park, but South Park works because its world actually supports cursing and this wild behavior. It's not written like Camp Camp where it feels like a children's show, because it always uses the fact that it's for adults in order to do funny jokes or make crazy scenarios that it couldn't do if it wasn't for adults. So instead of feeling awkward, it just feels like when the kids curse in South Park, it's because they're children and children curse a lot, and that works in its favor. Camp Camp's cursing feels weird because outside of it and occasional other moments, it feels like it's constructed to be a children's show. So it feels unnatural and wrong and falls into that issue of if a show's basically okay for all audience most of the time, just make it for all audiences and get rid of the cursing. For a different show or pilot that I talked about previously, Knights of Guinevere, it also handles cursing poorly for similar reasons. I've spoken on this show before and I could have done way better if I'm being honest. I kind of hoed it a little bit. But I want to focus on the cursing since it never creates an environment in which the cursing feels justified, since it's practically a kid's show due to how the dialogue is written. And whenever it does occasionally use curse words, it's always unnecessary and clunky. Because it has the aura of a children's show similarly to Camp Camp, it makes sentences with cursing feel weird because it's like the writer hasn't actually used curse words before or just began putting them into dialogue for the first time. Big sentence that I feel is very off is when the boss of this character says to her,
"No. Well, ain't this a fucking howdy do, Andrea, Franklin?"
while she's betraying him. The F word being added to the situation adds nothing because it's completely unnecessary, even though the situation is tense, because in this instance, in how he says these words, he sounds more surprised than anything. And honestly, it's just really corny. If he just said, "Well, isn't this shocking?" nothing would have been lost, and the show moments later shows that it can have tense and serious dialogue without cursing.
Stop biting me! Fight back proper! You stole my boat. You stole my android. And now you're throwing a tantrum like a child. You know what happens when you break the rules.
I'd say that this makes sense since the creator of Knights was previously known for creating the highly successful Disney XD show, The Owl House. So of course they couldn't have put curse words into that for practice, but that's just me. As I said, there are many shows that get cursing wrong, but these are the opposite cartoons that come to my mind when I think of ones that do so. Shows that almost get it right. As opposed to shows that just either fail or succeed at using strong language, the failings of shows that almost get it right can also be helpful, namely the first one I'll mention being Bedfellows. It was an extremely raunchy comedy back in the 2010s, and while I think it effectively made it clear that it's for adults because of its style of humor, I think that it overall diminished any potential for cursing being an effective tool within the show due to overuse and its uncreative, constant 2010s edginess. This video title alone should tell you what you're in for if you watch this show. What the hell is this title? If the show paced itself a bit and decided to be less edgy, quote unquote, it's not even that edgy really, it's just weird, then the cursing and a lot of the wild jokes maybe could have worked, but all it has are sex jokes or extremely mean-spirited ones, so the cursing just feels like nothing when it could have been an additive if the show had restraint and some more creativity. Funny enough, Helluva Boss has the opposite issue. We're all tired of the endless repetitive critiques of this show, big one being the cursing, but it almost got it right due to its premise. It's hell, and it was supposed to be about immoral demons that are contracted to kill humans. It makes sense as to why they'd have so much strong language, and I expect that to be raunchy and very violent because of what it is. But the problem is that the show presents itself as unrestrained and wild, but it actually fully follows current societal boundaries, making the show's edginess feel artificial. In simple words, it's safe edgy, as it'll have characters do extreme things that socially nobody really cares about, like murdering people, but it'll never do anything truly edgy like having a character say or do something socially controversial, even though its premise suggests that it'd have no problem with doing so, which makes no sense and puts it in this weird gray area of seeming totally off the walls and offensive, supported by the immense amount of swearing, but then it's not supported by actual character actions and what happens. I mean, all we have to do is look at the character Blitzo in Western Energy. This guy's fine with killing children, but he isn't fine with saying the word retard, even though he said it in the pilot, and he's characterized to be a guy who's wild and uncaring of offending people.
Oh, it's fine, Mills. Your husband is just, how do I say this without being offensive? Retarded.
The hell bees shot, you fucking really can't say that word anymore. The appointment is under blitz.
It's simply because during the social comic in real life, when the pilot was created, nobody cared about that word. But during the time of Western Energy, people cared about that word and found it offensive, which is exactly why I say the show is safe edgy, since it won't actually cross any lines without relinquishing its false persona of being edgy. In short, Helluva pretends to be edgy via its massive amount of curse words, but nothing else supports that image it wants to craft for itself. Adult shows without cursing. I've noticed that a lot of anime for older audience have little to no cursing while still being effective. Death Note's able to do this because it's tense and serious almost all the time, its dark subject matter like death, violence, and morality, and the consistent seriousness it treats everything with establish it as a mature show fit for people who are older while still being even watchable to teenagers, for example, since Light isn't screaming the F word internally every time he screws up, or L gets closer to finding out who he is. It's detailed numerous internal monologue when he and the other characters think while they're stressed that's more than powerful enough to communicate how characters feel in place of any cursing.
Because I wanted to play tennis with you, you'll assume that I'm preparing to take a step closer, laying the groundwork to get to know you better.
And then you're going to try and trap me by getting me to say something that only Kira would know.
And for an opposite example, Agretsuko is a great comedy for older audiences with little to no cursing because of its down-to-earth premise and lack of offensive or raunchy jokes. Its goal is to be relatable and to suck you into the interpersonal dynamics of Retsuko and her peers because for the most part, nothing extreme happens. Usually the highest stakes of the show each season is like Retsuko doesn't do well dating a guy or something. Funny enough, since it's not insane, all the humor is very grounded, its pacing is somewhat slow, and it's about a woman in her mid-20s trying to find out what she wants in life. It's very likely that it wouldn't be interesting for younger people since it both wouldn't be relatable to them yet, and it's not wild at all. Of course, there are exceptions to the rule, like maybe someone younger likes it a lot due to the art style, but I'd imagine that because of these aspects, it mostly has an adult audience without needing to curse to be mature, or to do anything raunchy. There are a lot of other anime that have no cursing that are also for adults, but in these cases, it's only a positive. Anyone of any age generally can watch things like Death Note and Agretsuko, which makes its fan base potentially way bigger than just adults, and yet it can still target older audiences because of either their dark themes or because of its down-to-earth relatable premise. Conclusion: whether or not a creator decides to use cursing is ultimately up to them, but I wanted to point out that this is a tool that should be respected and taken into consideration when using creating dialogue or figuring out your target audience's age. If your show's like Camp, where it's basically just a kid show most of the time, then probably just make a kid show and use a cursing restriction to your advantage like Adventure Time, where that show uses creative and silly alternatives to curse words that give the world and show more flavor. Though, if you're making emotionally tense scenes like BoJack Horseman and generally dealing with the premise or topics that can only be fully appreciated or interesting to older audiences, then cursing will be fine and could enhance your efforts and intentions with what you're creating. But that's just my take on the matter as someone who generally writes stories without cursing intentionally, even if they are for older audiences. Make sure to subscribe, join the server, leave a like on this more experimental video, and I hope that it made you think a bit.